I thought architects pretty much done everything from surveying to engineering, but that's not actually the case.
They teach you at school. Who is architect? What is architect's responsibilities or duties? Or how do you look at architect's role as in day-to-day tasks?
So before university, I wasn't really sure exactly what an architect's responsibilities were. I just knew that they design buildings, they look nice, maybe they done safety, maybe they done something to do with mathematics, I didn't really know. So once I went to university, I wasn't really exactly sure in terms of the fine lines and details. They sort of teach you more of the creative side, the creative process, as well as understanding space.
So I was thinking architect does everything. But that was my perspective, that if I go to architect, he does everything. Who is a structural engineer? Who is an engineer? What do the engineers do? And what are the differences between an engineer or an architect?
I also thought the same as you. I thought architects pretty much done everything from surveying to engineering, but that's not actually the case. In my course, I also mentioned I also learned engineering. So with that, you sort of see the differences between what's an architect's role and also engineer's role and how they sort of work together, especially in practice. So I have worked in practice, I've worked at 2 different places. I've also worked at an engineering firm, and I would say the main differences in terms of architects and engineers is that architects are the ones who realize the client's dreams.
Could you walk us through the education requirements for becoming an architect, including the commitment, what you need to be prepared for, what are the costs, like how much an architecture studies university cost actually?
So the process is definitely one of the more longer-winded processes. A lot of people compare it to medicine in terms of how long it is. I would say the conventional process or the most common process is about 7 years.
7 years?
7 years.
Wow,
yeah, it's a lot. 7 years.
And if you've done the 7 years, you have to really appreciate the work and the knowledge and what's going into it. It's like architect is almost the same like a doctor.
That's what I was saying, medicine, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
How can an aspiring architect prepare themselves financially for the education? Are there any scholarships or funding options available? So how much it costs to become an architect in 2023?
Honestly, it costs quite a lot. It's probably going up at the same rate as the living prices at this rate. With architecture specifically, like I said, it's a longer-winded process. So for the 3-year degree, it depends if you're an international student or if you're a national student. In my case, I'm a British student. Because of that, I would only pay the traditional fees, which is 9,250 per year, in terms of the student loans.
So it's 27,000 for 3 years.
About so, that's for 3 years. And then if you also do maintenance costs, then that will be additional. A lot of people usually take out around, 4,000, 5,000 maintenance fees. A lot of people don't have time to work, and that was the same in my case. I did do a few 0-hour jobs on the side here and there. Maybe once a month I'll do a job here and there if I had some extra time.
What was the biggest challenges that you faced in the journey towards the certification, to get to that level where you are, and how did you overcome those obstacles?
Honestly, I believe it is the imposter syndrome. It's believing that you're not good enough, that you're not actually deserving to be in a space. I feel as though a lot of people in the creative space, specifically within architecture, struggle with this. Architecture is a sphere which a lot of architects use a lot of different jargon. Certain people speak the language of architecture and some people don't. So they might be as skilled as another person, but because one person uses a lot of different types of terminology and all types of blasé, etc., they might not feel as welcome, and that was definitely my case. I believe in 2nd year and 3rd year, there was many instances where I wouldn't say I wanted to quit, but I felt like I was an outsider looking in, and I didn't necessarily deserve to be there. But in terms of me overcoming that, I guess it was having tutors who are, you could say, supportive. People who are sometimes using these words are also the same as you. Like I didn't really speak to much peers. I was sort of isolating myself in the 1st and 2nd year, which you could say was affected by COVID a little bit. But as I started to sort of open myself up and speak to different people, I sort of started to realize that everyone else was also similar like me. Like sometimes I didn't have a clue and they didn't have a clue. We were the same.
So sometimes speaking up and saying, well, I don't understand.
Speaking to people.
Being vulnerable and say, look,
Exactly.
What did you mean by this?
Exactly. Exactly. Honestly, that's it. Like there was times where I was like, mate, could you say that again? I don't know what that means. Can you just break that down? Then it makes sense. I'm like, okay, yeah, now it makes sense. Yeah. So honestly, it's just the jargon and just understanding, learning these words, but also being honest, like you said, vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly.
Because that connects, that brings out the connection between people. Because if we are just talking fancy names and no one understands us, there's no connection, there's no business, there's no relationships, there's nothing happening. How does the London architecture has developed over the past years, and where do you see it going?
That's a good question. So in terms of, you could say, the history of architecture, they definitely do teach it within London architecture. It is taught in a way in which you do some more historical readings on different types of buildings. As you go through different periods of life, they'll teach you through the different periods of Victorian buildings, Edwardian buildings. I would say it's more pushed in terms of postmodernist buildings, you could say brutalist buildings, or just modern buildings in general, you could say 1990s onwards, because most of the buildings that we see nowadays are built in 80s, 90s, or before that, or you could say the 2000s. And right now, most of the buildings that we work on are buildings that are reused or edited or added on. Or
what do you see the future holds? More glass and steel and concrete, or more bricks, or what will going to happen? Because, well, we see the new trends, the high-rises is rising up here in London. Canary Wharf has been completely changed. How the landscape will going to be changed, transformed?
I believe it depends on the type of building, but I would say in the case of, if it's a commercial building, like you said, definitely more curtain walling. I've done a bit of like work in facade engineering, and everything is pretty much now curtain walling.
Because of the cost as well. Is it more cost efficient?
I would say in terms of curtain walling, it is probably because the systems that are being used are, you could say, more efficient, more newer. They can control a few more things when it's curtain walling, or just in general glass and etc. You can control the sort of shading. You see a lot of these buildings nowadays, they have these new sort of shading systems.
What would be the advice that you would give to anyone who wants to study architecture or engineering? What to prepare, maybe mindset, maybe resources to succeed. So tips to succeed.
For architects, and I'll start with architects and engineers because they are slightly different, but there is instances where it's the same. But I would definitely say for architects, don't restrict yourself. Just sort of be open to thinking in a way in which is different to what initially inspired you. I mean, I came into architecture saying, you know what, I want to do stuff that is super, because I'm from Somalia, and which is in Africa, and I really was inspired by some initial African architects. I was like, you know what, let me go in there and just do everything African, and just, you know what, just be different, be crazy and funky and stuff like that.
Finally, can you share an experience or story that illustrates the rewards of being an architect or an engineer and the impact that your work can create?
Yes, so as an architect and an engineer, you have a lot of responsibility. With a lot of responsibility comes a lot of impact. Honestly, with an architect, like you said, the inspiration was being able to give back. I've seen a lot of instances in which this has happened. For example, like I mentioned, an architect who has inspired me was one who recently won the highest prestige offer, highest prestige trophy, or you could say, or award. Francis Kere. He's originally from Burkina Faso, within Africa, but he practices in Germany.